talk through it?
No, I was just saying that one piece.
Oh, hi, I'm live. Hi. We're ironing out details so we can bring some information to you.
Before we were ready.
Well, good morning. It is Tuesday, which is the day that we do our podcast. And today we're talking about boundaries. So before we dive into this, I want to welcome you to the Zone Chat. And if you haven't subscribed, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel now. Or if you're catching us in the group, we are here every Tuesday at 10:30 Eastern. And you can always catch the replay. And if you do and you're watching, please mark down #replay.
How are you today, Erin?
I am, I was telling you earlier offline, but we had a 3 a.m. ER visit. So I'm a little scrambled today, and that's okay. It's just where we are. And my boundary is that I'm going to get the stuff done that I need to get done and then move on.
That
and
makes
not worry
sense.
about the stuff that doesn't have to get done today. So I'm Erin Pennings. I am a copywriter and marketing strategist, and my co-host here is the lovely Pam Meister.
Hi, everybody. I'm a remote work expert. I help you reimagine work to find joy. And I also run the Zone community that we talk about every week.
And speaking of that community, it's a group of incredible people who are reimagining work to find joy, gain accountability, build a network, and create momentum towards their goals. So I'll let
if you haven't checked us out, we offer a free month, so you're welcome to join anytime. But today we are going to dive really deep into boundaries, and we're sharing our thoughts on why they're important, how do you set them, and most important, how do you enforce them? We asked a poll on our Facebook and LinkedIn, and we got some really good feedback. And I would say most people kind of fell into one of two categories. Erin, you want to share a little bit about what we found?
Yeah, so we love doing these polls, by the way. So if you, whether you're in the Facebook group, whether you're in Instagram, in LinkedIn, on LinkedIn, I'd love for you to weigh in on these polls and let us know what you're thinking, because it helps us as we're coming up with exactly what we want to share with you during the episode. So be sure to head over there. Anyway, so we asked, how well do you enforce your boundaries? And so most people, as Pam's just said, and I'm totally reiterating, fell into either a category where they said, awesome, I enforce my boundaries super well, they're clear, they're defined, and things are going great. The other side of the coin is that people have boundaries, but they're not real great at enforcing them. They're more willing to let scopes fly or let things eat into their time. Whether they want to or not, they're more likely to say, maybe some of the time, maybe not all of the time, which can cause challenges because I fall into that inconsistently category and I know all about it. So Pam, what would you like to tell us about what?
Well, I just want to say one more thing about the polls. Like, if you're chiming in and you say that you're rocking at something we're asking about, share some tips, let us know. And we'll shout you out on the podcast and give you credit for your great ideas. We want to help people understand, strategies around how to do things for themselves in a way that works well and lets them get closer to whatever their end game is. And for me, when I talk about boundaries and I think about them, the first two words that pop to mind are time and energy, because you're limited on both. And it's really important that you recognize that fact when you're thinking about things, or else, as we all know, we go full speed ahead like super women and men, and eventually realize that it's like over. We're tired, we're passing out, our brain's not functioning. And that is the why we need boundaries on those things, because we have limited time, we have limited energy, and it's how we use those things that make the difference. There's a lot of quotes out there that cite how much time we have in a given day, in a given year. I always like to quote Rent, 525,600 minutes. It's all the same. Every person that you know and that you see in life, online, has the same amount of time. It's how we use it that makes the difference on our outcomes. And when you are clear about your core values, which we tried to talk about last week,
Hopefully, I sent an email to my list that was like, it was just a comedy of errors, like
technology. Technology has boundaries too. When you're clear about your core values, then you can focus on how you want to spend your time so that your boundaries are in line with them. And I think that's the critical place for where to start. We'll talk about some tips later for setting boundaries. But when you focus on the things that you enjoy and that help you achieve your mission, then you can define what you will and won't do with your time and your energy. And this way, you're maximizing your output and your return on the investment of those precious resources. And
And I would say it's about prioritization. It's not about doing it all. Like, because you can't physically do it all. It's impossible. So if you're running around like a crazy person, which I am extremely familiar with because I typically am, and it's about figuring out what the priorities are. And that makes it so much easier to set boundaries.
Right. Sorry to cut you off. I just had thought you like triggered something. How good does it feel though when you sometimes set that boundary and you say, no, I can't do this because I'm doing that. And instead of running around like a crazy person, you feel very in control of the moment and you're embracing what you're doing in that time.
Right. And it's a choice. And when you start to view it as a choice, no, I'm not choosing to do this or that or the other thing right now. I have other priorities, whether it's food choices, whether it's activities, whether it's going to every single event, which I miss, by the way, I miss events, or whether it's a project that you're taking on or any of that. I think, yes, making that choice and saying this is a conscious choice, it's incredibly empowering.
It really is, because then when you're really focused on your why, people always say, what is your why? The reason it's important to know these things is because it gives you that clarity of focus. And if you simplify what you're doing and why you're doing it, all of a sudden things do become a little bit easier. And you find that you now can control your own internal and external things that get in the way. So when I talk about internal, I'm a big procrastinator. I was that person in high school and college and to this day that waited till 8 o'clock at night before my 20-page paper was due to start writing. And somehow I'd rock it out and get a great grade. But I needed that little bit of pressure, I guess, to make it happen. But with age and children
being a deadline junkie,
it's a little harder to work that way. But I kind of know that self-imposed pressure sometimes helps me. That being said, I need to have firm deadlines with my own self and others, because people will always ask for more. They want what they need right now. And that's okay. But you have to sometimes say, I can't give it to you.
That brings up an interesting point. And I was starting to think, like, I call that being like a deadline junkie, because you have to have that sometimes. And I joke about it, but seriously, like, I think the other thing that you just said that triggered something in my head was imposing deadlines and timelines, whether or not they're a real thing. You can certainly flex, but I'm thinking of an example actually from a client who I worked with a lot over the last year, who would say, oh, I don't care when it gets done as long as it gets done. And the reality is he had a very clear thing in mind about what he wanted. He was flexible, but instead of communicating that he'd like to see something by X date or the end of the month or whatever that looked like, he would say, oh, just whatever works for you. And for me, I know that the client always has something in mind, even if they're not quite upfront with it, or even if they're not able to communicate it. But so I was like, okay, I'm going to have this to you by this date and we'll figure it out. And if I need a little extra time, I'll let you know. But that way there's at least something in mind. But I know with other people, sometimes that's a hard boundary. And there's the word boundary, like to self-impose. And then that thing, whatever it is, keeps getting pushed because it's like, oh, it's not a priority, whether it's your own piece, whether it's the client's piece. And then it gets punted so far down the road that you don't make progress, which is
really important to set a start date and an end date, even if you know there's flexibility, because it gives you guidelines. And without those guidelines and that framework, things just hang out in space and something else takes that room because of our limited time and energy, which is kind of going back to what we started with this. And I think, you raised something the other day when we were talking about this topic that was really interesting, which was the whole idea of being prepared to handle certain situations in your business so that you can set boundaries when people want just one more edit when you're working on their web copy.
Yeah, and I
they
want to
want
talk
5
about
minutes to pick
scope
my brain. You know,
creep.
how do you handle those things? Because you have relationships with people. You don't want to nickel and dime clients, especially when they're ones that come to you a lot. But at the same time, like, again, limited time and energy. How does that dovetail for you, Erin, when you talk about scope creep? And maybe tell everybody what that is in case they don't know.
And it's actually interesting because of our conversation, I realized where there's some holes in my own. And actually a recent project that it was like, oh, look, neither one of us was super clear again. And so it's affected getting it done or our perceptions of things. So if you have not heard of the word scope creep before, if it's new to you, I guarantee that scope creep in and of itself is not. And all that scope creep is when you say, here is what we are going to accomplish. It's almost exclusively with client work, but it can be in other things too. And it usually results from not defining what you will do and what you won't do. And so it's like getting a series of emails. Oh, and can we make this one more edit? Oh, and can we do this other thing? And oh, can we do this other thing? And it's a very natural thing to ask for. And most of the time, clients don't realize because they're so in their zone. They're like, oh, I just need this. But especially from a copywriting perspective, and I would assume for just about any other perspective either, like, or also, if you are in the zone, you are insanely focused and you can get stuff done. But when these little things keep coming, it's almost like you have to change hats, get back into that focus point where you were thinking of this one thing, or you were writing on this one project, or you were designing this one thing. And it ends up that things get a little disjointed, or it ends up that it totally derails your morning or your afternoon or your day, even if you don't mind doing it. So, you know, there's a number of different ways to avoid scope creep. One, and the thing that I'm working on doing is working on improving my communication at each stage of the project. So, you know, it starts with clear contracts. That's like the number one thing. And clear proposals that say, here is the scope of what I'm going to do for you. Here are the things that are insanely specific that you are going to get. Here is the process. And then communicate that again once the project kicks off. Here's what we're going to do. Here's this phase. Here's what happens next. When you deliver the pieces and they're signed off, or whatever the final piece is for you, then it's like, okay, here's how we handle these things moving forward. Maybe you have up to an hour of final support. Anything outside of that will be handled at specific points, and it will be billed on however you want to bill it, because that does two things. One, it sets the expectation that your client has signed off, everything's final, they get these things and they know what to expect. It also sets the expectation that you're not just going to support them ad hoc for free, and that it reflects your time. And I just said two things, but the third thing is it helps them understand, and like, not just the value of your time, but you know, they're either really happy to pay you for your efforts, or they're going to get clear on what they actually want and ask more concise questions. And most of the time, if scope creep's starting to happen, and I'm really guilty of this, I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I can totally do that for you. And it's a problem because then it eats into my other productivity. Even if I totally adore the client and I want them to succeed. But what they find typically is that if you're like, hey, I can do this, we're at the end of our agreed upon hours, what we've allocated, I can do this one thing, and then after this we'll be billing for additional time.
So it's getting a clear end of that creep. So it's being flexible enough. Okay, I can give you this add-on. After that, we're going to segue to something new.
And most of the time, the really, really awesome clients, who most are 90% of them, are like, oh my gosh, yes, bill me for your time. I appreciate what you're doing. Let me know. Every once in a while, they kind of disappear, and it's like, okay.
Well, that's okay, because you're not working for free in business.
You're right. I saw a quote the other day that's like, are you free tomorrow? And it's like, no, I am very expensive tomorrow. And I really liked it because it's like, yes, I'm available, but I am not going to do this for you at no charge. And we can probably do like episode after episode after episode on client management and prospect proposals and costing and how to manage your time.
Right.
So maybe instead of going further down that path, we want to talk about some tips for getting clear.
Before we do that, I just want to chime in here and say, from like a remote working perspective, with so many people doing that and so many people now facing the shift to, should we go hybrid? Should I return to the office? It's not even a question that all the employers are asking. Some are just telling you what they want. I want you to ask yourself those questions. Do I want to return to the office? If so, how frequently? Do I prefer to work from home? What are my reasons why? Set your own boundaries around these things, because these decisions for yourself can make a very big difference when you're talking to your employer about possibly returning to the office or not, or in what way specifically you're willing to do so. Because now is your negotiation time. It's much like when you start a new job. You have the opportunity at the beginning to negotiate your salary, and then from there, it's harder to do that. This is your opportunity now when you're looking at where you'll work and when and how you'll work moving forward. This is the time to ask yourself these important questions, to set boundaries, because the truth, in my opinion, as a remote work expert, is that we're not going anywhere close back to where we used to be, even for some people that think they are in their businesses and some of the large firms. What's going to happen more and more are that the top talent who do set boundaries are going to say, no, this isn't going to work for me. And they're going to find a place that values them, just like Erin's saying with defining her boundaries and working with clients. Define them with your employer too, if you can. And if you can't come out as strong because you need the paycheck, do it for yourself, and then start looking for the right fit culture for yourself, because that is something that I feel very strongly about when you talk about work.
To chime in there, I think, that is one of the tips, like to gain that self-awareness of what's important. But I think that also applies to client work. Are you going to be available for meetings? How is this going to work? And for some people, they have a very clear process of what that does look like. And others, it's a little more fluid. And I think there's room for both, as long as you're happy with it. And I think that's where that's the power of boundaries, is like figuring out what feels good to you and then doing what you can do to stay in that lane. Is everything going to be perfect always? No, of course not. But if you know your ideal, you can always course correct to get back to what that is.
So the tip is that you have to be self-aware, reflect on what matters most to you, and then be proactive, not just reactive to situations, because that is what's going to set you apart when you look back at the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the year, 10 years down the line, and say, was I happy doing what I was doing? Did I have the work-life balance that I wanted to achieve? Could I be fully present for my children, my family, my friends outside of work because I set those boundaries? Was I able to work from home, if that was my choice, in a way that was maybe not reminiscent of pandemic work from home, but was productive and efficient and effective, so that I met my goals and my boss's needs and still had time for that jog in the afternoon or that extra cup of coffee in the morning with someone in my family? And
that goes back to the commute conversation. I think that was, it wasn't last week. It was the last full podcast that we did.
That's right. That's right. And one way to kind of gain this self-awareness is to track your time. I'm not big on tracking your time for billing. In a lot of ways, that's a whole other conversation, because that can lead to lots of micromanagement and mindset issues. But I am all about tracking your time for self-awareness. So one of the ways I recommend doing that is keeping a log on your existing calendar, however you do it, for a couple of weeks, and being really precise, almost like a diary. So you see when you spend those extra 5 minutes on Facebook scrolling, or 5 hours.
And Pam, you're working on a challenge too.
Yes. So I've done the Time Wisely Challenge in the past. We're going to do it again. If you're interested in joining this free challenge, we can definitely get back to you with information as soon as it goes live. Just drop an emoji in the comments, even if you're here for the replay, and we will walk you through how to look at your time so you can assess what brings you the most joy, what brings you the most profit, how should you be spending your time, so that you can set those boundaries way more clearly and effectively to achieve your goals.
Yeah, and I think I mean, first of all, I've done this challenge. It's awesome. Are you doing a self-paced one as well as a group one, or will it be?
It's going to be entirely self-paced at this point. I think people are really busy and they have a lot going on. So I'm going to do it over email, where you'll get an email every day with your next steps with access to me. If you reply to me, I'll answer you, and you get that one-on-one support. And if you're looking for the group opportunity, I'm going to extend it to my members in the zone at the same time. So you're welcome to join in and have that space to have that conversation with other people who are going through it, or joining our free Facebook community. We'll be making sure we post about it at the same time there if you want some ongoing conversation.
Awesome. And I definitely recommend it. It's a great opportunity to get clear on like things that you don't realize. You get a lot of clarity. Because I think, boundaries are for other people, but they're also for you. And it's not black and white. They, as you've said earlier, they're guidelines. So you have to get comfortable living in that gray area and understanding it's a little bit of shuffle to get to that point in that main boundary. So,
right.
It's one thing to track it with time, which is super important. But I think also it's worth tracking when it comes to projects. So if you're noticing a pattern, like, hey, this always seems to happen with not just one client, but across the board. I have a visitor coming in to see us here. Figure out when in your project that's happening and how you react. So you can put you can put practices in place and get some swipe files so that you can start avoiding some of it. And get some of that swipe messaging put together. And in fact, I can do that for some sample emails that you can use at different phases of things.
Yeah, so Erin and I have worked together quite a bit on a number of projects. And one of the things that we're excited to do is help people define their boundaries, go through the process of figuring out what matters most, and then coming up with the systems and the copy that you need for your marketing and for your communication so that they're clear and concise. And if this is an area that you believe would serve you well, send us an email at hi@thezonecommunity.com and reach out, or on social media, whatever way you want to connect with one of us. And we'll schedule a time to meet the three of us and get together and try to help you through that process, let you know what we can do to make your life easier by getting clear on your core values and then setting boundaries based on in your business and in your life. And I think
yes. And that can apply to everything. It can apply to your marketing. It can apply to your business practices. It can apply to your website. It can apply to just your SOPs.
Of course, standard operating.
It's always fun. Like flying. My boundary is that people have to be cool with my kids because they generally make an appearance.
And that's important. We talked about that in other episodes. Like when Erin meets with new clients, one of the first things she says is, listen, I have kids at home. We sometimes pop in. I do my best to line up something during important meetings where they're doing something and busy, but if they pop in, they do. And you know what? As a work from home mom, it doesn't bother me. And I actually think it's cute to get a glimpse into people's personality and personal life behind the scenes. It gives you an idea of who they are. And part of the reasons that we set boundaries is so that we can enjoy our family time, our friends, and all the things that we like, not just so that we can get the work done.
Right.
But what we have coming up next week is a conversation about progress and what happens when we're working towards a goal. Do you get out of the idea stage? Do you get stuck in the details? Do you have mindset issues where you're doubting yourself? We're going to pop this poll on Facebook and LinkedIn and send it out to you over email. We want to hear from you and know, do you make progress or do you get stuck in perfection? Let us know, because we're going to talk about it same time next week here.
And we have a story and an announcement to go along with that. So, yes, thank you for for laughing with me at Miss Cam. And then, yes, we'll look forward to hopefully hearing from you, seeing how we can help, seeing you in the zone, and really learning more about where you get stuck, as Pam said. So,
yeah, and if you're finding this to be useful information and enjoyable entertainment every Tuesday morning, or whenever you watch the replay, share YouTube channel with any friends and colleagues, because we want to help as many people as we can. And we look forward to connecting with you again. So have a great week. And until next time, just keep working on those boundaries.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.